You have cancelled plans again, not because something came up, not because you are unwell, but because the thought of leaving your home feels like being asked to perform surgery on yourself without anaesthetic. And when you try to explain this to others, they hear, "I don't want to see you." They do not hear what you are actually saying, which is, "If I do not have solitude, I will cease to exist." If you have ever felt guilty for needing to be alone, if you have ever apologized for protecting the space that keeps you intact, this video names what has always been true. You are not antisocial. You are structurally different. Welcome to Power and Myth. What Jung identified as introversion is not shyness or social anxiety. It is an orientation of consciousness toward the inner world that requires sustained solitude to function. For the INFJ, this need is not optional. It is the condition under which meaning can be made. This video explores the psychology of INFJs who need solitude. Not the psychology of preference, but the psychology of survival. The Hermit archetype has walked this territory for thousands of years. You are living what the lantern bearer has always known. There is a moment that arrives without warning. You are in company. The conversation is pleasant. The people are kind. And suddenly you feel yourself beginning to dissolve, not metaphorically. You can feel your sense of self thinning, like fabric worn too many times. The edges of who you are start to blur. And you know with absolute certainty that if you do not leave now, if you do not return to solitude, you will be unable to reassemble yourself. Other people do not experience this. They think of solitude as a nice to have, a bath at the end of a long week, a quiet Sunday morning. For you, solitude is the crucible in which you remember who you are. Without it, you are performing a version of yourself that will eventually collapse under its own weight. This is not introversion as it is commonly understood. This is something more specific. The INFJ absorbs the emotional and psychic atmosphere of every environment they enter. You are porous in ways that exhaust you. When you walk into a room, you are not simply observing the people in it. You are unconsciously processing their unspoken tensions, their hidden griefs, their performed personas. And all of this enters you, not as information you can set down, but as material that becomes temporarily enmeshed with your own psychic structure. Solitude is the only space in which you can begin to separate what is yours from what you have absorbed. It is the only place where you can stop translating and finally speak your own language. Jung understood that the introvert does not retreat from the world out of weakness. The introvert turns inward because the inner world is where reality is processed and synthesized into meaning. For the INFJ, this inward turn is constant work. You are constantly filtering the external through the internal, always attempting to make sense of what you perceive. And you perceive everything. The person who seems fine but is fracturing, the relationship that is ending 3 months before anyone else sees it, the shape of what is coming, this pattern recognition, this intuitive synthesis, happens in the background of your awareness, but it requires enormous psychic energy. And the only way to replenish that energy is through sustained time alone. This is the hermit's inheritance. The hermit is not the one who hates people. The hermit is the one who must withdraw to tend the inner flame that allows them to return with something of value. In tarot, the hermit holds a lantern. That lantern is not decorative. It is the light of self-knowledge that can only be kindled in solitude. The hermit goes into the wilderness, not to escape the village, but to find what the village needs and has forgotten. You are that figure. When you withdraw, you are not abandoning others. You are doing the necessary work of remembering who you are, so that when you return, you have something real to offer. But here is the shadow that most INFJs do not want to examine. There is a difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude is chosen withdrawal with the intention of return. Isolation is exile that masquerades as preference, and it is dangerously easy to slip from one into the other without noticing. You can begin by protecting your energy, and you can end by convincing yourself that you do not need anyone, that you are better off alone, that connection is not worth the cost. This is the hermit's trap, the descent into solitude that becomes a permanent retreat, the lantern that is never brought back to the village. Jung called this inflated introversion. The introvert who mistakes their inner world for the only world, who begins to believe that their perceptions are complete without external feedback, who become so identified with solitude that they forget it was meant to serve connection, not replace it. The guilt you feel when you cancel plans, when you turn down invitations, when you protect your solitude, even when it disappoints others, that guilt is not wrong. It is a signal. It is your psyche reminding you that you are a relational being living a life that requires periodic isolation. The discomfort of that guilt is what keeps you tethered to both worlds. It is what prevents the hermit from becoming the exile. The difference is intention. The hermit withdraws to return. The exile withdraws to hide. And the line between them is thinner than you want to believe. You must examine honestly which one you are becoming. Are you in solitude because it replenishes you? Or are you in isolation because you have given up on being understood? The psychology of INFJ solitude is not about learning to be more social. It is about understanding the rhythm your consciousness requires. You are not broken because you need more time alone than others. You are wired for depth, and depth requires space. Introverted intuition, your dominant cognitive function, processes unconscious material and delivers insights that feel like knowing. But this process cannot happen in noise. It cannot happen when you are performing the shapeshifter, adjusting yourself to fit every social context. It can only happen when you are alone long enough to stop translating and start listening to what your own psyche is attempting to tell you. This is why enforced socialization feels like violence. You are not being asked to simply show up. You are being asked to abandon the very process that makes you capable of insight. When you finally have solitude, what happens first is collapse. You do not immediately feel restored. You feel the weight of everything you have been holding without support. The exhaustion arrives in full, the facade drops, and for hours, sometimes days, you are simply recovering from the cost of being in the world. This is not rest. This is triage. Only after the collapse comes the restoration, the slow return to yourself, the re-establishing of boundaries between your psyche and the world's demands, the remembering of what you actually think, feel, and want. Solitude is not a luxury. It is the space in which you reconstruct the self that interaction disassembles. And here is what happens in that space that cannot happen anywhere else. In solitude, you access the part of yourself that knows, the part that is connected to something larger than individual consciousness. Jung spent decades studying the collective unconscious, the shared psychological structures that exist across cultures and time. You are particularly attuned to this field. In the noise of interaction, you lose access to it. In solitude, it speaks. This is not mysticism. This is the mechanism of introverted intuition operating at full capacity. Your brain is synthesizing vast quantities of unconscious data and delivering complete understandings. But it can only do this when the external demands are silenced long enough for the internal voice to be heard. The people who love you may never fully understand this. They will feel rejected when you withdraw. They will interpret your need for solitude as commentary on their inadequacy, and you will carry guilt for hurting them, even as you know that without solitude you will have nothing of substance to bring back to the relationship. This is the hermit's burden. To love people and simultaneously need to leave them. To know that others experience the very solitude that restores you as abandonment. There is no perfect solution to this paradox. You can only be honest about what you need, and trust that the people who are meant to stay will learn to respect the rhythm rather than resent it. You are not too much. You are not difficult. You are a consciousness that requires a specific architecture to function. And that architecture includes long stretches of time during which the external world makes no demands. Other people recharge through connection. You recharge through withdrawal. Neither is superior, but you have been living in a world that treats your need as pathology while celebrating extroversion as health. The exhaustion you feel is not only from the work of being INFJ, it is from the work of constantly justifying your own needs to a world that does not recognize them as legitimate. You do not need to justify solitude. You need to claim it as the structural requirement it has always been. Which archetype are you living right now? The hermit who withdraws with intention and returns with light, or the exile who has mistaken isolation for safety? Tell me in the comments. And if this video names something you have carried alone for too long, subscribe. This is Power and Myth. You are part of a community that understands that your need for solitude is not a flaw. It is the condition of your gift. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.